All right, Becca, take it away.
All right, thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here and to be talking about this. So this is my journey into tech and to where I from starting from where I was and up until this point. Okay. And so for me, this has been like a very much unexpected journey into tech. And I didn't expect where there's always those interview questions where they ask you, where do you see yourself in 5 years, right? And this is like very much not where I would see myself in 5 years. And my Aunt Renie's here. Hi, Aunt Renie. So great to see you. So I'll start from where I was before. So I was an adjunct English instructor for 10 years, and I wasn't unhappy there. Maybe I wasn't happy there either, but I didn't have any plans to change, is the point. And so when I was going in to have my fourth kid, um, I had had three previous, like semi traumatic birth stories. And this was number four. And I thought, like, oh, everything is going okay. And then suddenly it wasn't. And so after I had my daughter, I knew something was very, very wrong. There was clear indications that things were not going right. And like my oldest son was one of the ones who pointed out the first things that was wrong. And everybody said, like, it's okay, you're fine. And I thought that I was okay and fine because they told me I was okay and fine. And then things got worse. And I said, hey, it feels like somebody just stabbed me. And they were like, you're okay, you're fine. This sometimes happens with moms of four kids. Like, well, I don't think that's probably true. But nobody also told me that it wasn't true, right? And so in those moments, you depend on and you trust the people that you're supposed to trust. And in that case, it's the doctors and it's the nurses. And there was such a pushback. Like I was saying constantly, like, I think there's something wrong. I think there's something wrong. And they kept saying, no, there's nothing wrong. And my parents came in and they said, I think something's wrong. And everybody said, nothing is wrong. And then they sent me home and I said, there's something wrong. And they said, it's fine. You'll be okay. But what it turned out to be was my uterus ruptured into my bladder and it was not fine and it was not okay. And nobody spent the time to figure out like what was going on with me. And so I spent a solid 2 weeks um thinking that like I had kind of lost it and that I didn't know what was right and what was wrong. And those 2 weeks felt like a very, very long time. They felt like years of my life until I finally demanded that somebody see me and listen to me. And that's really what it took. It took me demanding someone to listen to me to say, this is not right. This shouldn't have happened. What is wrong with me? Because this is not something that happens to moms. It's not. You're just ignoring what I'm telling you. And so when I finally was diagnosed, the urologist that diagnosed me was like, well, this is what's going on. Your uterus ruptured into your bladder, and you should go see your OBGYN. And prior to this, I had gone to see my OBGYN, and she had said to me, you're not my problem. And I cannot tell you how many times I played those words in my head. You are not my problem. It was like probably thousands of times every day for a solid year before I knew that that was not normal to be doing that thing. And so I felt when she said that to me, it was like, um, in the most desperate part of your life, you have people that you trust, and then they say, you're a problem, right? You're not a person. What are you? You're not their problem. And so for me, that shifted a lot of the ways that I felt about things, a lot of the ways that I understood the world that I was living in. Um, and what happened eventually was, um, my mom had a friend from high school who was an OBGYN and she had her phone number and she called that OBGYN and told her what was happening. And she saw me, I think it was the next day. It was like a Friday evening or afternoon. So she stayed late to see me. And like one, that's privilege, right? Because my mom knew somebody who she could call. And that does not happen for everyone. And so I was like very lucky to have that happen. And two, that OBGYN, she saw me, she did a better diagnosis, which was more specific. And she said, I know somebody who can take care of this, and I'm going to call them tonight. And so on a Friday night, I got a call back from her personal phone onto my phone. And what a contrast in approaches there, right? Like I went from somebody telling me I wasn't their problem to somebody calling me late on a Friday night to make sure that this got taken care of. And so eventually that led to a surgery that happened pretty quickly. I think I got a call on a Thursday night and they were like, you're going to come in on Monday. I was like, oh, okay. This felt like it took forever, but at the same time, it was super fast. Um, and so I had very great doctors who were really kind and talked me through everything. But also, my morphine pump wasn't properly capped. So post surgery, I was in a lot of pain and they didn't cap it properly and I overdosed on morphine. And so my husband was there with me and he said, I don't think she's really breathing like she should be breathing. And the nurses checked me out and they're like, yeah, she's not breathing like she should be breathing. So then I had to have Narcan, which was like the longest, however many minutes of my entire life, because it undoes the effects of the morphine. So I had just had my body cut open, one organ removed, another one cut open and resegmented, and I could feel all of it. And however long that was, I don't even know how long it was. And like I go back and think I would like to get the records to kind of see how that was. I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea, but the point was it just was like in an eternity in that space. And a lot of um it created a moment in time that stood still for me and that also would revisit thousands of times after that moment. And so after I went home, things were not normal because they couldn't be, because what I thought was my life wasn't my life anymore because I had just like gone through all of these things. Um, and so I didn't really know my place. I saw everyone just keep on going with their lives and my life was stopped. It's like I posted this in virtual coffee earlier today, but there's this line in one of Kurt Vonnegut's stories where he talks about like the birds kept chirping, right? There was like all of this silence, but the birds kept singing. And in those moments, it's like you really realize when the birds are singing because you feel like your life has stopped and everybody else is moving past you, right? And it's a hard thing to explain to other people or to say, like, I didn't know, I didn't have the words to understand or to walk through this. Um, but I just like felt very isolated in this spot. And then I started having panic attacks. It was right before Thanksgiving, and I I went to sleep and I thought I wasn't breathing. So I sat there timing how long I was breathing. How many minutes have I been breathing? What is the rate of my breathing? And it's just, that psychological thing that happened. And I remember being super mad at myself, like, this isn't rational. Like, I'm breathing, I'm alive, it's okay. Right. But my body like didn't internalize this idea that like I am okay, because it was stuck in that moment where I remembered that I wasn't breathing. um and so after that, my mom is a therapist, and I told her about it. And she had said, like, hey, it might be useful to get on some medication and to see a therapist. And at the time, I kind of thought, like, oh, well, we all go through this experience. Like, I went through trauma. I got to just process it on my own time. And then I went to therapy and I was like, oh, well, that was really, really useful. And so then I started to understand like exactly what was happening to me, like what was happening in my mind, what was happening with my body, and like how I could move forward or grow with that. And I will say, somebody said to me, it doesn't end, it just gets different. And that didn't make a lot of sense when they said it, but now it does make a lot of sense to me. It's this idea that we can keep moving forward. And this has been we're at 4.5 years after this has happened. And there's still moments like this where I just start to struggle with what I went through, and have a hard time talking through it. But I, I know that there was also time like I had to make up, because when you're in those moments, when you're in preservation mode, it's very, very challenging to maintain your relationships or to move forward at all, right? Because you are just trying to protect yourself. You're trying to live day to day. And so then when you finally come out of that trauma, you'll find that things are different. The world looks different. Your relationships, your friendships look different, because where you were, not everybody else was in the same place. Like they might have kept moving forward while you were stuck in that moment. And so then there's a lot of stuff that happens there. And for me, I So as a result of this, my husband is a software engineer. And after this all happened, he said, hey, you should learn how to code. And like I said, I had been teaching college English for 10 years. And I thought, are you kidding me? Like, learn how to code? Do you not see that? Like, I've got all this stuff I'm trying to work through. He just kept bugging me and bugging me. And I'm like, okay, like, if you just stop talking about it, then I will try it. And so I found that when I started to learn how to code, those thoughts that had cycled in my mind for a year straight, thousands of times every single day, they stopped. And so what happened was it became very, very therapeutic moving through this, because I could finally breathe. Like I finally had a moment to understand what I was going through. I finally had a moment to feel like I wasn't a person stuck in trauma. And that was like a big step forward for me. And so I think also, as part of that, my therapist said to me around that time, like, hey, Becca, when is the last time you felt safe? And that seems like a silly question for most people, right? Um, but I had to really think about it. It took me a really long time to kind of understand that question. And like my response was, I just don't know. Right. And so often, like when you're stuck in that trauma, when you're stuck in those modes, it becomes really challenging to understand that you don't feel safe. And when you don't feel safe, you can't thrive for sure. You can't grow. You can't move forward because you're stuck in that trauma. Um, and so finally understanding that and finally having some respite while I was coding was super important to moving forward myself. And so not only did I start coding and find that like peace of mind while I was doing it, but I also found a community of moms who were learning to code. And that was so important to me. I had been teaching as an adjunct for 10 years. There was no community. I had tried so hard to get community going and it just wasn't happening. And just like the structures for part-time college instructors, it's not good anywhere in the United States. Um, but I found people who were willing to share their experiences. I found another mom who talked about how she made it through postpartum depression with coding. And I just felt like for the first time in a really long time, I could kind of talk openly about the struggles that I was going through. And having a supportive community was so important to seeing me move forward. And as a result of that, I ended up getting a full scholarship to Flatiron School. It's a coding boot camp, and um, I we have an educational mentor, I think it's called there, and her mine was Katie C. McKenna. And one of the first things she said to me was, "Becca, I went through trauma too. Do you mind if I share a little bit about that with you?" And I said, "Sure." And so this was like a very pivotal moment for me because Katie was run over by a semi truck. And she has a book called How to Get Run Over by a Truck. And she's very smart and clever and funny through the whole thing. But she said so many of the words that I had been thinking in my own head for so long. And I finally understood that trauma isn't just what you went through. I felt like I was the only one that could understand this because what happened to me happens to like 1% of women and fewer than that, I think, in the US. And I just kept thinking like I'm the only one that could understand. But she said the same exact words that I said in my head too. And then I understood like there's a sense of community in that. There's a sense of understanding. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I didn't feel alone. And that was so important to my growth and my progress because I was able to understand that there are other people here who have made it through this. Like, I saw Katie and I don't like to use the word like, oh, she was an inspiration to me, but it was, I could see how she was thriving. I could see that she wasn't struggling every single day. And I thought, she said the same words I said, and I can get there too. And she helped me get there. And so, I found through that process that I started blogging and I started tweeting and I started making connections because I don't like to speak openly about these things. And like prior to this experience, I never would have, one, cried in public, two, talked about the struggles that I was facing, but three, be this emotionally vulnerable. But I found that because Katie was open with me and it helped me so much that it is very important for me to continue to do that because there are so many people out there who are facing different struggles. And sometimes just hearing that somebody else went through something similar to what you went through is enough to kind of bring you forward to ask for help or to become part of a community. And one of the hardest and worst things I think you can do is to be isolated. And that's where I spent a lot of my time. And I realized that I didn't want anybody to ever feel the same way I felt when I was in that doctor's office when she said, "You are not my problem." Right. And so that kind of became the goal of my life that I was going to try my hardest to make sure that nobody felt that same way, felt that emptiness, that loneliness, that deep despair that I felt. And so when I finally graduated from my coding boot camp, I found a job pretty quickly, which is not really common. but I had been kind of talking through this process, and I didn't feel prepared at all in any way. And my husband was like, well, nobody feels prepared. Just like tweet out there that you're looking. And I did, and I found a job. And I was very, very lucky to have that. And so what happened was I had a conversation. It was a really positive conversation. I thought like, okay, this is not exactly what I'm looking for, but this hits 3 out of 4 of the things I was looking for: flexible, remote, part-time, and mission driven. So I hit everything but mission driven. And my career coach at Flatiron was like, well, you don't have to hit all 4 of those things in one place. So 3 out of 4 is pretty good. And so I thought, well, you know what? I feel like we had a really good conversation. I have a good feeling about this. And so I took the job. And it was challenging because I I went from being in the front of the classroom as an instructor to learning. I felt like very much like I was a student. And so I spent a lot of time like mad at myself. Like, why don't I know this yet? Like, why can't I figure this out yet? Right. And I had a hard time communicating. So a lot of people were like, oh, well, you taught for 10 years. You must be a really good communicator. I'm like, well, you know, in certain circumstances, yes, I can be a really good communicator, but when I get really nervous, it becomes harder for me. So there were like a lot of growing pains that I personally needed to work through. And I was in a really positive work environment. And we finally kind of like hit our stride of communication. And then COVID hit. And my kids' school, I have 4 kids. The school texted and said, well, we're going to go you need to pick up everyone's books. We're going to take 3 weeks off, which turned into like the rest of the year. um, and I remember I was driving over there on the way to pick up the books, and I was talking to my dad on the phone. I was like, Dad, I don't know if I'm really going to have a job that much longer because I'm not doing essential work. So like I would probably be one of the first ones to be let go. And then I got like a message on Slack. It was like, hey, let's catch up when you get back or something like that. And that was the conversation that was, hey, there's no more work. So now I was at home with 4 kids. My husband was working 2 jobs, and we were doing school at home, and I was interviewing essentially for the first time, because the last time I got a job, it was a conversation. It wasn't this technical interview where you have to do these 4-hour things and spend all of this time. And so I was like navigating this landscape that I didn't anticipate navigating at all, let alone during a pandemic, let alone with kids. I like literally, my youngest son came through while I was doing an interview, past my desk, opened my bathroom door, went to the bathroom and flushed the toilet with the door open while I was in an interview. I was like, well, sorry, I don't know. I don't even know what to say right now. But it was just like these challenges. And at some point, I realized like I don't have the energy to care about this anymore. And to it's like spend this time. I just can't deal with it. But then I also realized that I had felt the sadness that I felt before in my life. I was crying every single night. I was like, when was the last time I felt this? Because I know this feeling. And it was like when I went through that moment, when I was rejected by the doctors, when I came home after trauma. And so I thought, okay, I know this, and I have some idea of how to navigate through these feelings of desperation. And it involves not being isolated, but we're in a pandemic and everybody is stuck at home. So how do you not isolate? And then I knew like, okay, this is the time when we need community. And so it's been a year. April 3rd was a year. I put out a tweet like, hey, does anybody want to talk about interviewing or something like that? It just kind of took off from there. Because people did want to talk, and I wasn't the only one that felt isolated, and I wasn't the only one that felt lonely. And so what started as a once a week Zoom call very quickly grew to a twice a week Zoom call. And I remember like in the early days, so now we do them on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We have what's called virtual coffee. Um, I think the first one I did back to back. So I did like a 10 a.m. and a noon. And I remember being so tired after that moment. I'm like, is this what Dabble Sessions feels like? Is this what football camp feels like? Because also I'm an introvert, and believe it or not, I am like super shy when it comes to talking to other people that I don't know. So it's like intensely exhilarating and draining at the same time. And then I knew that this is something that we need to keep doing. Like I needed it, and I knew that other people needed it. And I was super lucky to have so many people that were invested in helping me. Sarah McCombs came on and she was like, "Hey, let me help you. Like, do you need help with something?" And I'm like, not good at asking for help. And I was like, okay, yeah, I could use some help. And then Brian Healy was like, "Hey, maybe we should have a Slack group." And I was like, "Do you do we need a Slack group?" Like, right? Like I just like need a little push in the right direction, right? And so what happened was we went from doing these meetups twice a week to having this messaging with Slack and to having different ways to support members. And it's all because the community came together and worked together to push this thing forward. And we eventually got to this point where we were doing breakout rooms in Zoom. And so now we had like virtual coffee this morning. I think we had about 50 people there today, and we have about 300 people in our Slack. And we had 5 different breakout rooms. So we have room leaders who can kind of moderate and facilitate the conversation, who can support the members that are there. We have note takers who will check in with everything, take notes, and then post them into our Slack. And that's so people who can't be there can still feel like they're a part of it. And so, we have all of these amazing volunteers. And in that first year in October, we did this Hacktoberfest event, and it really became clear to me, I think then, because when I when we were doing this, I kept thinking like, well, once the pandemic is done, this probably won't be interesting anymore, right? Like people won't keep coming. And like one, that the pandemic lasted a lot longer than I thought it was going to last, right? Like I thought we were going to be done by the end of summer, and here we are still in the midst of it. Um and also I just didn't realize that people were out there searching for community, which for me I feel like in retrospect, like I've I learned remotely. I have always worked remotely as a developer, and like there's a certain loneliness that comes with that, and there's a lack of community. And I feel like I should have recognized, but I didn't, that we were moving into this space where I'm not the only lonely one out there. I don't know what it is, but like I think maybe I was like feeling special, like I'm the only lonely one out here, right? Like I'm not the only lonely one, and nobody's the only lonely one, because we are all there. And if we could be here together, then we're doing much better than being lonely alone, right? Um, and so that's kind of, we went with this Hacktoberfest event. And Hacktoberfest is this big thing that happens in the developer community in October, where we all kind of work towards contributing to projects that are open to anyone. And if you have 4 contributions, then they send you like t-shirts and stickers. And it's just like a really kind of fun time, but also kind of stressful for new developers, because there's not a lot of great opportunities out there for new developers. So everyone keeps saying like, get into open source, and you try to, but nobody has done, very few people have done a really great job of allowing opportunities for people who are new to the industry. providing a welcoming experience, providing something that's not totally overwhelming. And I can't tell you how many times I looked through repositories like, okay, I'm going to do this year, right? I'm like, I can't do that. This beginner issue, I don't even know what they're talking about. Like, how is that beginner issue? And so we felt it would be really great to be able to work with our members to support them in that endeavor, to help them to get their first pull requests, to provide mentorship, and to help maintainers of those projects make it more accessible to new developers. And so, by creating some structure, creating some organization, we really focused on being able to provide for every single person in our community and have this idea of horizontal mentorship. So, like, every person can mentor any person in the community. It doesn't matter what stage of the developer journey you're at. Like, we all have experience that we can share and that can empower the person next to us. And I know for me, I was a mentor, a contributor, and I was a maintainer. And I think Sarah McCombs, who I mentioned before, she encouraged me. She was like, you should go for it. My repository, my project was not ready. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try this anyway. And I got some other good advice. It was like, just let the people know that you're working with that you are learning along the way too. And so the project that I've been working on is a postpartum wellness app because I found that when I searched the App Store for postpartum wellness, it was all about losing weight. And I thought, well, this is not an okay thing to happen, right? Like, there are so many things that we're struggling with. Like, these should not be the top decisions for people. And so I started working on this app for um, tracking postpartum wellness, which has to do with kind of like habit tracker and sleep and mood. But the best part of that was I was able to learn along with the community. So, what I had been trying to build by myself, which I was not making huge progress on, was so much easier when I had other people who were invested and who were willing to talk through it. It was like that second thing, like, oh, hey, community. Again, like, this is the thing that I need. This is the thing that we need. And I think I had such a resistance because of like being an introvert. But knowing that I had the support was enough to keep me going. And after that happened, I can't remember how many first time contributors we had to that project, but I think it was over 20. And we had so much help and support and mentorship. And hearing everybody talk about what a positive experience they had and how proud they were of the growth that they made with the support of the other members was something that finally clicked in my brain, like, hey, we might actually be a thing that keeps going on after the pandemic. And I knew, like, there's room for growth for all of us. There are so many things that we can do to be supporting each other. It's just finding the right ways to structure and to support everybody. And so this is kind of where I started to apply this person-centered care approach. And so person-centered care, I found out, so I went through a couple of years where I was loudly kind of being angry at the doctors who ignored me. And then finally, I was loud enough where the hospital administrators saw it on Facebook and they were like, hey, we would like to have a meeting with you. Would you like to have a meeting with us? And I was like, yes. So my dad had been an employee there for a lot of years, and he came with me because I felt like I needed support. Like, I couldn't walk into it was me in a room of like four men who were like 20 years older than me, right? It's overwhelming. And I needed that support, someone I could trust. And the thing that I kept coming back to was this idea of person-centered care. Okay. So the idea of person-centered care is that healthcare should be based on on the unique person's needs and their right to health, that the health institution should focus on the abilities of the person and encourage activity, that the healthcare should be coherent, and that health professionals should always approach patients with dignity, compassion, and respect. And they should work on an ethical perspective. And so, like, those four things made so much sense to me because that was not at all what I got in that situation. None of those things. And I said, this is what needs to happen. And also, people need to be okay with apologizing. Because quite honestly, when I overdosed because they didn't cap my morphine pump properly and they apologized, I was okay with it. When they told me I wasn't their problem, then I was not okay with that. And I cannot tell you what happens in my brain to make things okay and not okay, but it was enough that there was a recognition that, hey, like, we're sorry that this happened. That was enough for me to move forward. So, this idea that there's this holistic approach to understanding people really drove me forward. And this idea that every person is like complex and unique and dynamic. And so in tech, we have this idea frequently where we're talking about users, where we're talking about developers, where we're not talking about like people, right? Like every person is complex and they have different needs and they have unique needs and they have a need for community and the ability to give feedback and to have positive feedback along with it, right? And it's not something that should be unique to healthcare. It's something that should be applied across all boards because when we see people, when we see human beings first, that's when connections are made. That's when progress is made. And like these are the moments where we grow, right? Like when you are stuck in a traumatic situation, it is very difficult and maybe impossible to grow or to move forward. When you find yourself in a positive environment, that allows you to take risks. It allows you to change. It allows you to grow. It allows you to ask questions that you might not have asked otherwise. And so for me, I had spent so many years of my life replaying that moment with my OBGYN saying, "You're not my problem." Because in that moment, I wasn't a patient, I wasn't a person, I was a problem. And I was a problem that no one cared enough to come up with a solution for. So this fueled my goal to make sure that this didn't happen to anyone else. And it forced me in a position where I had to be vulnerable, where I had to talk about my story, where I had to cry in front of people that I don't know, whether I want to or not, because I know that those were the moments that got me through the thing, right? And there are times when it's hard, and there are times when it's exhausting, but also I know how important it is to continue to create this community, to be part of this community, right? And there have been plenty of people along the way. I kept meeting with people as virtual coffee kept being a thing, like despite what I thought was going to happen. And so many people said, like, well, you can't do what you want to do, right? Like, you're an early career developer and you have this community and you can't do both. And a lot of times I was like, well, watch me. But after you keep hearing it over and over and over, it can be really, really challenging. Like, you know, maybe they're right. Maybe I can't do that thing. And even a couple of weeks ago, I was in a meeting with somebody and they were trying to tell me, like, well, you're doing it wrong, right? Like, you want the most amount of people in the community. And like for us, what it's always been about is the intimacy of the community. Because when you have an intimate community, you can be vulnerable, you can be open, you can create these authentic relationships that allow you to share moments like this. Moments that don't come if you walk into a room full of strangers. Because I'll tell you what, I've been to a conference where I walked into a room full of strangers for 3 days and they felt like a room full of strangers for 3 days. And it was the worst. And I couldn't wait to leave. And it was in a really beautiful location. So it's a shame. But the point is that when we have these small communities, when we have these small groups, it allows us to create these authentic relationships that become so important. And so, part of this is like, this is what makes virtual coffee so special. Like, we're doing this and we have these small groups of people that come together. And to be a member of virtual coffee, you have to come either on a Tuesday or a Thursday first to become a member. And that's important to us. And some people say, like, why are you doing that? Like, why are you making people come to these things? It's at an inconvenient time. Well, it's a challenge, right? Like, we want to be able to provide for everyone, but we know that we cannot at this stage provide for everyone. So it's like recognizing what your own limitations are as a community, planning for the future, but also knowing that seeing each other, hearing each other's voices creates a different kind of connection than you would have if you were just in a Slack full of 1,000, 10,000, whatever people. And for me, that's not meaningful. That's not a place that I participate. And those are the situations where I walk out and still feel isolated. And so there's this idea of, um, like, how do you scale empathy, right? Like, I don't know how many times, though, I've heard members say, I've never felt like a part of something until this group, or I don't have family or support, but now I have virtual coffee and I'm thankful for that. And for me, the impact on each individual is the most important thing. And that's like not in line with the metrics that we're seeing from so many other people, because they're saying, like, let's quantify the value that you have for your community. How do you quantify empathy? How do you quantify impact? I'm sure somebody has some kind of way of doing it, but I think that just helping each person, knowing each person, seeing each person where they're at, that is the thing that creates ripples in the rest of the community. And I'm not interested in doing something that quantifies who my community is. I'm interested in doing something that creates ripples that go far beyond what I ever could have imagined, because that's where we're at already. We're at a place that I never could have imagined. And that's what's most important. And so we have this community and we're working hard to support this community in the best ways that we know how. And we're working on the day-to-day and we're working on the future as best as we can. And in many, many ways, we're the anti-startup, right? We're not moving fast and breaking things. We are moving slow and making deliberate decisions. And that's where I want to be, because I think that is how you create community. That is how you allow other people to feel a part of something. And that is how you create these authentic relationships. And so much of that is the inspiration that the community gives to each other. It's the mentoring that happens all around. It's the tools that we use to support each other and to support all of the people in the community. It's the communication that we have. But for me, the most important thing is just having a community that cares about each other and making sure that we support that in the best way that we can. And so I am, thank you all for listening to me talk for a while. And I appreciate you all being here. I am definitely up for questions if you have them. I didn't look at the chat because I get super distracted really quickly, but I can open that up and look at it now.
I don't know if I saw any questions. I think just a lot of love and support. So you should definitely read through the chat and we can send you a copy. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to come off of mute or comments or things they want to share.
I just want to say thank you, Becca, for coming tonight and giving this amazing inspirational talk. It's so great that you're comfortable being vulnerable in front of people like you are, because I think that you really inspire people who probably feel the same way but just aren't able to express it. So thank you.
Thanks, Angela. And I'll say, I don't know that I feel comfortable doing it. I think like 10 minutes before my talk, I asked if somebody else wanted to give it for me. So.
Well, you did a great job.
Thank you.
Becca, if I may, just a quick question. Hi, Thomas Dixon.
Hi.
How often do you feel like you're meeting people in similar circumstances or similar traits within the tech development community? Have you come across others you feel are quite similar to yourself or have experienced trauma and directed themselves in a similar direction?
Yeah, for sure. I see it all the time, and sometimes I see it before they see it, right? Because I know what I have gone through and I kind of know what it looks like. And so sometimes it's kind of like navigating. I know that for me, like as I was going through trauma, there was somebody there that was telling me like, you're gonna have this, and this feeling. And I was like, I'm not going to, right? And then I did. But also there was like that resistance. And so I think, for me it's super important to like meet every person where they're at and allow them to share their story in a time that they're comfortable sharing it. But I feel like so many of us have gone through trauma in some different way. And I like got on a kick of reading memoirs, trauma memoirs specifically for a while. And it was super useful to me because it was the same thing. I heard everybody saying the thoughts that happened that I had. Like, there's one of the common things in trauma is you think that it's your fault, right? And it doesn't make sense. Like, rationally, you can look at it and it's not your fault at all. But there's this thing that also happens. My therapist was talking through it and she was like, that's common with trauma survivors because it's a sense of control, whether it looks like it or not. Like, blaming yourself is a way to have control over the thing that happened to you. um and so I don't know, like that was really important for me to recognize and move forward. But like, even people who've been in toxic work environments, we kind of have or I kind of had a narrow definition of what trauma was. And then when I saw other people talking about it or describing the things that they felt, it helps to open up for me that, okay, trauma means something different for every single person. And we all work through it in different ways, but we all work through it better as part of a community.
Okay, thank you.
So I did share your website in the chat and I'll share it again, but what is the best way to get involved with virtual coffee?
Yeah, so if you come on a Tuesday or Thursday, that's how you become a member, and that's 9 a.m. or noon Eastern right now. And then we'll have a form for people to submit. You can also follow us on Twitter. We're at Virtual Coffee IO, and various other social media. I think we're at LinkedIn and Instagram, but Twitter and coming to coffee is the best way. And then when you come to virtual coffee, you get an invite to our Slack group, which is members only too. And that's just like such a really nice group of people who are always willing to help each other. And I was like kind of going through and creating this virtual coffee model. And one of the things that maybe seems more measurable is how quickly people respond to calls for help, right? And so we have like a help and pairing channel, we have an office hours channel, and I don't know that I've ever seen somebody ask for help and not have somebody respond pretty quickly. And we're an international group, so it happens all hours of the day. Yes, we have Meeting Place. Meeting Place, thanks, Marie. That has all of our events. We've got, well, tomorrow is a brown bag, but I'm giving a talk that's like a little bit more specific about person-centered approach to tech. But to come to a brown bag, it's a members only event. They'll be posted on YouTube, our YouTube channel later, which we have a nice link to YouTube now because we got 100 subscribers. Oh, and I'm gonna forget what it is. It's Virtual Coffee IO is the end of the tag. I'm sorry, I should have had that. But if you come to a Tuesday, Thursday, if you become a member, then you have access to the live version of those brown bags. Otherwise, you got to catch them on YouTube for the replay. Well, it would help if I spelled coffee right. Can't find it. Yes, here we go. Oh my gosh. We've got autoplay on a video, and it autoplays me first. And it's always like very jarring because I start hearing myself when I try and look up the channel. Yeah, if you go to youtube.com, I'm gonna type it in the chat so you don't, deck.com/c/virtual coffee IO. That should take you there as well. And it will autoplay my voice.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Becca. Thank you for sharing your story and all these great resources with the folks who are here. Thank you everyone for joining us. We do have more Venture Cafe programming happening after this. So I'll pop a link in the chat to our 6 o'clock program, which is Startup Roundtable, another fun community group of people who are kind of supporting each other and providing feedback around different startup ideas. So definitely feel free to join that, or feel free to head over to our website, venturecafephiladelphia.org, and check out the full program of events there. But otherwise, I hope everyone has a wonderful evening, and thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank
All right.
you.
Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Becca.